I'm standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning. The coffee is going. The radio is low. I'm looking out the window at the maple tree in the backyard, and I'm thinking about how that tree got so tall. It wasn't here when we moved in. I planted it the year my daughter was born. 1979. I can still feel the weight of her in my arms. 7 pounds 6 ounces. Her hair was dark like my husband's, and her eyes were my eyes. That's what everyone said. You have her mama's eyes. I used to think that was the best thing anyone ever said about either of us. The coffee finishes. I pour it into the same blue mug I've used every morning for 30 years. My husband Earl drank out of that mug until he died. Cancer took him in 14 months. We didn't talk about it much. He was from the generation that didn't talk. He'd sit in the recliner and watch baseball, and I'd sit on the other end of the couch, and we'd exist near each other, and that was enough. That was love for him. For me, it was more complicated. I wanted words. I wanted someone to look at me and say, "I see you." But Earl never could. Not because he didn't care. Because he didn't know how, so I stopped asking. That was the year before he died. 2014. My daughter Melanie was 35. She lived 40 minutes away in a house she bought with money I helped her get. Her husband Rick was a mechanic, good-looking, charming, the kind of man who shakes your hand and you feel like you've known him your whole life. Melanie met him at a bar when she was 24. She brought him home that night and told me about him the next morning with this light in her voice that I had not heard since she was a little girl. I held that light carefully. I kept it safe in my chest like something alive. I helped Melanie and Rick buy their first house, $20,000. I gave it from my savings. I told Earl I was going to do it, and he said fine because that's what he said to everything. $20,000 in 2003. That was the first time. Then Melanie had a baby, a boy named Tyler. And Melanie went back to work time, and I picked Tyler up from daycare 3 days a week. That was fine. That was what family did. I was retired by then. 62 years old, and my pension was enough. Barely enough, but enough. I filled my days with the grocery store and the library and the occasional lunch with my sister Donna. Life was quiet. Life was good. Tyler started school, and Melanie needed someone to pick him up on Tuesdays because her shift started at 3. I did that. Every Tuesday for 4 years. I drove 40 minutes each way in the rain and the snow. I sat in the school parking lot and waited for the bell, and Tyler would run to me with his backpack bouncing, and he'd tell me about his day, and I thought this is what I was made for. Being useful. Being needed. Being in the middle of something that mattered. Rick never came to the door. He was always working or sleeping or on the phone in the garage. I didn't know him well. He was polite. He'd nod when I walked in. He'd say, "Hey, Mrs. Hollies." Then he'd disappear. Melanie explained it once. Rick was a quiet guy. He didn't know what to say to you. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. That's the thing about being a mother. You build rooms in your head for the people you love. You furnish them with the best version of them. And you lock the door to the room where the truth is sitting in the dark waiting to be let out. Earl died in the spring. April 22nd. I was holding his hand and his eyes were open, but he wasn't in them anymore. I closed them for him. I'm the one who closed his eyes. That will follow me forever. I laid him in the ground next to his parents and his grandparents, and I went home to the empty house, and I sat in his chair, and I did not move for a long time. Melanie came over that week. She held me. She said, "I'm here, Mom." I believed her. I needed to believe her. She stayed for 3 days, and then she had to get back to Tyler and work and life. She called every night for a week. Then the calls slowed down. Not because she was busy. Because I think she realized I was going to be alone, and that made her uncomfortable. Not because she's heartless. Because being around someone who is grieving reminds you of how fragile everything is. And Melanie had built her life on the idea that nothing was fragile, that she was fine, that they were fine, that the cracks were somewhere else and not in her house. I moved through the first year like a ghost. I did the dishes, and I paid the bills, and I watched the maple tree lose its leaves and grow them back. I drove to the grocery store on Tuesdays because that was my day. I stopped picking up Tyler. Melanie said it was fine. I said okay, but something small shifted inside me, a drawer that wouldn't close all the way. Then Melanie called me in October. She said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. I could hear it in her voice, that careful tone, the one you use when you're about to ask for something you think you don't deserve. She said, "Rick and I want to buy a second property, an investment, a rental." She said it would be a good move. She said Tyler's college fund could really benefit. I said I don't have a lot. She said, "We know. We're not asking for a lot." She said 30,000, just to get the down payment. I said I'd think about it. I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at the wall where Earl used to hang his fishing rod. The indent was still there, a small shadow of where the mount had been. I thought about my mother, how she gave everything to my father, and then he left her with 3 kids and a broken hip and a refrigerator that didn't close all the way. I swore I would never be that woman. The woman who gives until there's nothing left and then wonders why nobody is holding the door for her. But I gave anyway. Because Melanie was my daughter. Because I raised her. Because she was the best thing I ever did with my body and my life, and I would not let that be taken from me by my own pride. I gave her the 30,000. She came to my house on a Saturday, and I handed her the check, and she hugged me, and I smelled her shampoo, and I thought about when she was small, and she'd run to me from the yard with her shoes untied and her face dirty, and she'd say, "Mama, look." I still had the check stubs. I kept them in a drawer. I kept everything in drawers, little pieces of proof that I existed and that I mattered. That was 2015. The next year she called again. This time it was 15,000. Rick's truck broke down and they needed the repairs and the loan payment, and Tyler needed new shoes for football. I gave it. I wrote the check and I handed it over, and I didn't say a word because I didn't want to be the mother who makes you feel bad. I didn't want to be the thing that came between you and your life. By 2017, I had given Melanie $90,000. 90,000. My savings account was almost empty. I had sold Earl's truck to pay for his funeral and his medical bills, and what was left was what I had lived on for 3 years. I had stopped going to lunch with Donna. I had stopped buying new clothes. I wore Earl's flannel shirts, and I ate rice and beans on the nights I wasn't hungry enough to cook. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell Donna. I didn't tell my sister. I kept it locked inside me like a stone I was swallowing every night before bed. I want to be clear about something. I am not stupid. I am not naive. I worked 30 years at the post office. I sorted letters and packages, and I knew how numbers worked. I knew what was happening. But knowing and admitting are 2 different countries. I knew that Melanie and Rick were spending more than they were making. I knew that Tyler's football shoes cost $40 and not $400. I knew that the rental property they were talking about never got built. But I kept writing the checks because the alternative was to face the truth. And the truth was that my daughter was taking money from me and I was letting her. That was a different kind of death. Not the kind where your heart stops. The kind where you watch yourself disappear from the inside. I didn't confront her. That was my failure. I should have sat her down and said, "This stops now." I should have said, "I love you, but I will not feed you until I starve." But I didn't. Because every time I thought about it, I remembered the day she was born. I remembered the nurse putting her on my chest and her face scrunched up and her fist closed around my finger. And I thought that fist was still holding me. That no matter what she did, I was her mother, and she would never let go. But she did. She let go. The phone call came on a Wednesday in March 2018. I was making lunch. A turkey sandwich, Earl's recipe. Just turkey and mustard and 2 slices of white bread because that's what he liked, and I still made it for myself out of habit. The phone rang and it was Melanie. She said, "Mom, can you come over?" I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Nothing's wrong. I just need to show you something." I said, "Okay. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove to her house. Rick's truck was in the driveway. Tyler's bike was on the porch. The door was open. That's when I should have turned around. That's when every alarm in my body was going off. An open door means someone is expecting you, or someone wants you to see something. I walked in and the living room smelled like vanilla. Melanie was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of her. Rick was in the garage. I could hear him out there tinkering with something. Tyler was at school. Melanie said, "Sit down, Mom." I sat down. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. It was a bank statement. My bank statement. My account number was right there. The balance was $412. I had transferred $6,000 to a checking account that I didn't know existed. The transfers went back 7 months. 7 months of money leaving my account and going into a hole I couldn't see. Melanie said I found this by accident. I was helping Rick with the taxes and I saw the statements. I said, "What did you do?" She didn't answer. She looked at the table. I said, "Melanie, what did you do?" She said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I said, "How much?" She said, "Total. Everything you've given us over the years." I added it up. She was wrong. She didn't know about all of it. She didn't know about the check stubs in the drawer. She didn't know about the $20,000 I sent in 2003. She didn't know about the small transfers I made when I thought nobody was watching. But what she did know was $90,000. Over 5 years, her face was pale. She was crying. She said, "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." She said we were just trying to keep up. She said Rick lost his job and then he got it back, but the debt was already there and I just kept going because I didn't know how to stop. I said, "You should have stopped." She said, "I know." I said, "You should have told me." She said, "I was scared." I said, "Of what?" She said, "Of you being mad." I sat there and I looked at that folder and I felt something inside me crack. Not break. Crack, like ice on a pond in early spring. You can see the water underneath and you know it's only a matter of time. I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I remember the light through the windshield. I remember the truck next to me at one point. I remember getting into my garage and sitting in the car for a long time. The engine was off. The radio was on. A country station. Someone was singing about a woman who waited too long. I turned it off. I sat in the dark, and then I started to shake, not crying, shaking. My whole body was trembling like I was cold, but I wasn't cold. I was hot. I was burning from the inside. I went inside. I went to the drawer where I kept the check stubs. I pulled them out. I spread them on the bed, 20,000 here, 15 there, 10 here, 5 there. Small amounts that added up over months that I thought nobody saw. I thought I was hiding them, but you can't hide from the bank. The bank keeps records. The bank doesn't love you. The bank just watches the numbers move. I called my sister Donna. I said, "I need you to come over." She came. She sat on my bed and looked at the checks and she didn't say a word for a long time. Then she said, "How much?" I told her. She said, "Jesus." She put her hand on my back. I didn't cry in front of her. I was past crying. I was somewhere beyond tears. I was in the place where your body keeps functioning, but your mind has left the building. Donna helped me get a lawyer. A woman named Patricia who specialized in elder financial abuse. Patricia sat across from me in her office and she looked at the numbers and she said, "This is criminal." She said I could press charges. She said Melanie could go to jail. I said I don't want her to go to jail. Patricia looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "Then what do you want?" I said I want my money back. She said we can file a civil suit. We can get a judgment. But it takes time. And in the meantime, your daughter is not going to talk to you. That killed me, not the money, the silence. I called Melanie the next day. She didn't answer. I called the house phone, no answer. I drove over there, the door was locked, the bike was gone, Tyler's shoes were gone from the porch. Everything that smelled like them was gone. I stood on the sidewalk and I looked at that house and I thought about the day Melanie brought Rick home, the light in her voice. The way she said his name like it was a prayer. I called Rick. He picked up on the third ring. He said, "Mrs. Hollies." I said, "Where is my daughter?" He said, "She's not here." I said, "Where is she?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "She took my money." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." I said, "You know." He said, "She told me last night. She said she was scared to call you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you might not love her anymore." I hung up. I stood on that sidewalk and I pressed my hands against my face and I let out a sound that I didn't know I had in me. Not a scream. Something lower. Something from the gut. Something that comes from a place that doesn't have words. Tyler called me 2 weeks later. He was 16. His voice was different. Older. He said, "Grandma, I'm sorry." I said, "I know, baby." He said, "Mom told me." He said, "She's really messed up." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you hate her?" I said, "No." He said, "I don't either." He said, "She's still my mom." I said, "I know." He said, "Can I come over sometime?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." He hung up. That was the last time I heard his voice. He came over once, sat in my kitchen and ate a sandwich and told me about a girl at school. He hugged me at the door. Then he didn't call again. Melanie didn't call. Rick didn't call. The phone in my house became a piece of furniture. It just sat there, ringing for nobody. I unplugged it eventually, not because I didn't want it to ring, because the silence of a ringing phone is worse than no phone at all. The lawsuit took 14 months. Patricia was good. She found every transfer, every check, every record. Melanie's lawyer tried to say I gave the money willingly. Patricia brought out the bank statements and showed the pattern. The amounts increased over time. The timing lined up with Melanie's expenses. The court saw it. The judge issued a judgment. Melanie owed me $112,000. $112,000. That was the total. Every dollar I had given, every dollar I had sent, every dollar I had transferred without knowing where it was going. Melanie didn't pay. She couldn't. Rick had filed for bankruptcy the year before. The house was underwater. The rental property they never built was still a dream. Tyler was in college on a IELTS scholarship and a Pell Grant. Melanie was working 2 jobs. She called me once during the case. She said, "Mom, I'm trying." I said, "I know." She said, "I'll pay you back." I said, "I know." She said, "I love you." I said, "I know." And I did know. I knew she loved me. I also knew that love and theft can live in the same house, that you can love someone and still take from them, that you can sit at their table and eat their food and sleep in their bed, and then drive to their bank and drain their account and still believe you are a good person. The judgment sat on paper. It meant nothing. I couldn't garnish her wages. I couldn't touch the bankruptcy. I was an old woman with a piece of paper that said someone owed me money. I put it in a drawer. The same drawer. The one that was almost empty now. I moved out of the house in 2019. I couldn't afford it. The taxes went up. The roof leaked. The furnace made a sound that meant it was dying. I sold the house to a young couple who tore down the maple tree the first week. I watched them do it from the living room window. They cut it down on a Saturday morning. I sat in Earl's recliner and watched the tree fall, and I thought about how I planted it the year Melanie was born, and how it had grown for 40 years, and how it was just a tree, but it was also a timeline of my life, and now it was gone and so was I. Not dead. Just gone. Moved to a 1-bedroom in a complex off Route 9. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a window that looked at another window. I brought Earl's flannel shirts and the blue coffee mug and the check stubs from the drawer. That was everything. The first few months were the worst. I would sit in the ament and listen to the walls. They were thin. I could hear the couple next door fighting. The man would yell and the woman would cry, and then there would be silence, and I thought that's what marriage sounds like when it's over. Not screaming. Silence. Not peace. The absence of something that used to be there. I called Donna every day for the first month, then every other day, then once a week. Then I stopped calling because I could hear her getting tired of me, not because she didn't care, because I was just a voice on the phone talking about nothing. How's the weather? How's the ament? Did you eat? I was boring. I was old. I was the kind of person you check on once and then forget about because their pain has no edges. It's just a low hum, background noise. Thanksgiving came and the ament was quiet. I made a turkey. Small, 1 breast. I ate it over 2 days. I watched the parade on the television and I thought about Earl watching it in the recliner. The way he'd say that woman's hat is ridiculous. I'd say it's beautiful. He'd say you're blind. I'd say you're deaf. That was our marriage. That was the whole thing, bickering, loving, bickering. I didn't hear from Melanie. I didn't hear from Tyler. I sent a card to Tyler at his dorm. He sent one back, a printed one, Happy Holidays. I kept it on the fridge for a while. Then I took it down because it hurt to look at it, not because it was cruel, because it was nothing. A card with no handwriting, no message, no I love you, just Happy Holidays in font size 12. Christmas was worse. I put up a small tree, 4 feet tall. I hung 3 ornaments, one for Earl, one for Melanie when she was little, one for Tyler when he was born. I sat under the lights and I drank eggnog and I thought about what my mother did on Christmas when my father left. She set the table for 4 even though there were only 3 of us. She left a plate for him. She told us he was working. She did that for 6 years. 6 years of setting an empty plate and pretending. I swore I would never do that. But I was doing it. Not with Melanie's plate, with the whole life I thought we had. The version of Melanie that brought Rick home and had that light in her voice. That version was the empty plate, and I was setting it every day. The second year in the ament, I started going to a coffee shop on Thursday mornings. Not because I liked coffee. Earl's coffee was in the blue mug. This was just something to do, a place to sit where someone might talk to me. The barista was a girl named Jess. She was 22. She'd ask me how my day was, and I'd say fine, and she'd say good, and that was the whole conversation. But it was something, a voice. A person who looked at me and saw me, not a daughter, not a sister, just a woman buying coffee on a Thursday. I saw Melanie once, at the grocery store. She was with Tyler. He was 19, tall, his father's jaw. He didn't see me. Melanie did. She saw me and she stopped. We stood there in the cereal aisle and we looked at each other, and I saw everything in her face. Shame, love, fear, regret. She opened her mouth and I said, Don't talk to me. Not because I didn't want to, because I knew that if she talked to me, I would forgive her, and I wasn't ready to forgive her, because forgiving her would mean letting go of the anger. And the anger was the only thing I had left that felt like mine. She walked away. Tyler looked back at me. He had my eyes. I saw them, clear as anything. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just looked, then he followed his mother out the door. I stood in that cereal aisle for a long time. A woman asked if I was okay. I said yes. I paid for my groceries and I drove home, and I sat in the car in the garage and I didn't turn the engine off. I just sat there. The radio was on. Someone was singing about a train that left without them. I turned it off. I went inside. I ate cereal for dinner. I washed the bowl and I dried it and I put it away and I brushed my teeth and I got into bed and I stared at the ceiling until my eyes closed. It's been 3 years now. I'm 68. I go to the coffee shop on Thursdays. Jess still asks me how my day is. I say fine. She says good. I drive to the grocery store on Tuesdays. I sit in my car for a while before I go in. I look at the steering wheel. I think about Earl. I think about Melanie when she was small. I think about Tyler when he was 5 and he'd ride on my shoulders at the park, and he'd say higher, higher, and I'd go higher until my knees hurt and he'd laugh. I think about the maple tree. I think about the check stubs in the drawer. I think about the bank statement in the folder that Melanie put on the table, and the way her hands were shaking and the way she couldn't look at me. I don't hate her. I want to say that. I don't hate her, but I don't forgive her either. There's a space between those two things that I live in. A hallway with no doors. I just walk through it every day. Thursday to Thursday. Tuesday to Tuesday. Morning to night. I drink coffee. I pay my bills. I keep the check stubs. I keep the judgment. I keep the blue mug. I keep the flannel shirts. I keep all of it. Not because it matters. Because if I let go of it, I will have nothing. And I am so tired of having nothing. Some nights I dream about Earl. We're sitting on the porch. It's summer. The fireflies are out. He's in the recliner and I'm in the other end of the couch, and he's watching the Braves and I'm reading a magazine and neither of us is talking. That's the dream. Just silence. Just being near each other. Just the sound of the crickets and the screen door creaking. I wake up and the ament is quiet and the ceiling is white and the light comes through the window at 5 in the morning, and I lie there and I listen to the world start up again. The birds. The neighbor's dog. The espresso machine at the coffee shop 2 blocks over. Life going on without me. That's what it feels like most days. Life going on without me. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Melanie ever pays me back. I don't know if Tyler calls. I don't know if the anger ever leaves. I don't know if I'll sit in this ament until I die, or if one day I'll get up and walk out the door and start over somewhere where nobody knows my name. I don't know. I just know that I gave everything I had to the people I loved most, and they took it, and they didn't even say thank you. That's the that stays. Not the money, not the judgment, not the empty house or the cut tree or the unplugged phone. The not saying thank you, the not saying anything at all. I'm still here. That's the thing, I'm still here. I don't know why, I just am.